everybody. Welcome back to the Heumann Perspective. Today, it's really an honor and a privilege for us to be speaking with Charlotte McClain-Nhlapo, who is a longtime friend and is currently the Global Disability Advisor for the World Bank. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, Charlotte, in meeting our audience, give us a little bit of background information of who you are.
Well, thank you. But before I do that, Judy, I just want to say, thank you for doing the work that you do, and continuously and relentlessly fighting and ensuring that persons with disabilities have access to justice and equality in the world. So I just needed to say that up front. So as you said, I'm the Global Disability Advisor at the World Bank Group. And I come to this position from a background of law. I studied law. I actually studied human rights law. And the reason I opted to study law or chose to study law was that I was really interested in finding tools to address issues around racism. So I have a South African mother and an American father, a white father and a Black mother, who were very involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And I grew up in Southern Africa, not South Africa, because I couldn't live in South Africa at the time. We couldn't live as a family in South Africa at the time because of racism. So
What year was this?
Excuse me?
What years was this?
Oh, so this was in the early 70s. And so I think what happened was that really began to build a sense of consciousness in my person. And so when I was thinking about a career, I knew that it had to be something that would address aspects of social justice. At the time, I was not a person with a disability. So I went on to study law. After my law degree, I was involved in a car crash that left me disabled, and that took on a whole different trajectory.
You're a wheelchair user, right?
And now I am yes, indeed, I am a wheelchair user, and I think that in many ways has really emphasized and made it a lot more deliberate about what it is that I do. So my work at the bank is focused on disability inclusion and looking at how to include persons with disability in development projects. But I've never lost sight of the larger and the broader aspects of social justice, of human rights, and of equal opportunity. And so what I'm doing at the bank right now is continuing to do my work around disability inclusion, but also after the brutal murder of George Floyd, there was a strong sense within the World Bank that we needed to start doing something as an institution. And so I was asked to do some work on leading various parts of the institution to address issues around anti-racism. And I think for me, it was an excellent opportunity, because there was a part of me that really wanted to be part of the protests. But because of my disability, in my case, I had 2 punctured lungs after my car crash. What I didn't want to do is put myself in harm's way. So there was no way I could actually be out there protesting. I was worried about the virus. And so I found working in the bank and really focusing on what I can do to address issues around anti-Blackness and anti-racism has been has been a way to help me address some of these issues.
I'm wondering, Charlotte, could you also give us a little bit of information about what the World Bank is?
So the World Bank is it's a bank, but it's a development bank. And so it's not your typical bank. And what it does is it provides grants and loans to developing countries to address aspects around their development. It also provides a lot of knowledge. So we often talk about the bank as a knowledge bank. And so we provide a lot of expertise, a lot of analysis to developing countries on what development could look like, or where we can share different examples of development. And so part of my work is to ensure that in the development of those projects, that we have a dimension that includes persons with disabilities. And that could range from supporting countries to have an education system that is inclusive of children with disabilities, or it could be looking at infrastructure and ensuring that roads and transportation systems are accessible to persons with disabilities. So there's a wide range of development activities that the bank supports. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., but we have presence across the globe. And again, our focus really is working through governments of developing countries and assisting them to meet the various development goals that they have signed up to.
Charlotte and I began to work together at the World Bank in 2003, 2002? Four. I was the advisor at the bank in 2002. And then we were very lucky. The president of the bank was supportive of the work, and we were able to bring a number of people in, Charlotte being one of them, and people who've really gone on to attain real leadership positions in the international community. So Charlotte, you are a Black woman who acquired a disability. And one of the things that you were discussing, the reason you went to law school, what your focus was going to be, how are you, and what are some of the challenges that you experience as a Black disabled woman that are relevant for us to learn about?
So that's a great question, Judy, but it's also a very complex question. Because I feel that, well, first of all, we have to recognize that, you know, we all have more than one identity, right? At least most of us do. And so, you know, we then also need to recognize that often these identities intersect, right? And they can intersect in a way that can then have overlapping disadvantage or overlapping discrimination. So often when I'm discriminated against, and yes, I am discriminated against, I wonder what the basis of discrimination is. Is it because I'm Black? Is it because I'm female? Or is it because I'm disabled? And I usually end up with the sense that it's because I'm disabled. And I often wonder if I was female, white, and disabled, whether the treatment would be different. And I'm pretty sure it would be. So I think it's really important when we think about the intersecting identities of Blackness and disability, that we recognize that there is an overlap. And sometimes it's not so easy to say exactly what it is. And I think for me, the lesson learned from that is that it's really important for us to think about, or rather important for us to ensure that, you know, we recognize the intersecting issues around ableism and racism, and that we're very deliberate to not erase disability from our work on anti-Blackness, but neither should we be erasing Blackness from our work on disability inclusion. And I say this because I feel that when we look at, even if we look at the global disability movement, it's beginning to change and it's beginning to be more representative of various demographics, but it has been predominantly very white. And I think we need to be, and when it hasn't been white, a lot of the people who've been of color are people who have come from Africa, from South Asia, from Latin America. So, you know, people, but not necessarily from the United States. And I think in this country, we need to focus on how do we ensure that we are empowering, enhancing, and enabling young Black people of color who are disabled to take on leadership roles and to participate and have space and platforms. And the exciting part of that is that I think we see an emerging number of leaders, of young Black disabled leaders, that I think are already rising to the occasion and are beginning to do some incredible work. And I'll name just a few. And I know when you start naming people, it gets difficult because you obviously don't
name everybody.
You don't name everybody, but I mean, a couple of people do stand out for me. I think, somebody like Dr. Angel Miles, Andrea Levant, who you know well, D.R.C. Charrington Neal, Justin Justice Shorter, Carrie Gray. So look, I mean, I could go on, right? And these are young Black people with disabilities that are doing amazing work, but they're not doing work that is coming up from nowhere. It's also building off of work that has been done by the late Deirdre Davis, Carmen Jones, Claudia Gordon. So look, there are people who are doing great work. But I do think a couple of things for me is important to ensure that there's recognition of their work, that people are empowered and able to have the opportunity, but also that we start thinking about the history. And Judy, this one is for you, because I really want to thank you for Crip Camp, because I think in watching that documentary, it taught me something. Well, it taught me a lot, but it taught me about some Black history that I was not aware of. So, the fact that the Black Panthers were a very strong ally in the disability rights movement in the early days is a strong story, but it's not being told but for Crip Camp. And I think these are the types of stories that we need to be able to enunciate and really get out there. Because ultimately it's about bringing all these, ultimately it's about solidarity, isn't it? And about allyship and bringing everybody together, because we're all fighting for justice, for equal opportunity, and for dignity.
This discussion for me is what I hope over the next year will just be the first of other discussions, because one of the points that you were raising earlier is the fact that you were a non-disabled person who becomes disabled. And I think that's one experience. And then there's the experience of the Black disabled person or Latino or Asian or whomever who is born with their disability and is then growing up in a non-disabled world. And I think the stories of people are different. I'm wondering, when you acquired your disability, what was your thinking about disabled people before you acquired your disability? Did you come with biases around people's capacity as a disabled person?
Yeah, so I've thought about that a lot. I mean, I think I didn't know socially any disabled people. I grew up in Zambia, and the disabled people that I saw were people who were begging on the streets. But I think when I acquired my disability, what I did have was I had a solid background in human rights, and I had the foundational principles of non-discrimination, of equal opportunity, of equality. And so I think that really helped me think through and navigate that space. Do we have our biases? I think we all have some level of bias.
Of course.
And I think I've had to work through that. I also think that, in many ways, it opened up a whole new world for me. Interacting with people with different types of disabilities wasn't something that I was accustomed to. And even after I became disabled, I typically worked with people who had disabilities like mine, so used a wheelchair. But once I started working more on kind of the rights part of it, I started to meet people with different types of disabilities, people who were blind, people who I had never met a deafblind person until I was, in my 30s. So, you know, or had a conversation with a person with an intellectual disability. So it just opened up a whole new horizon. And just for me was so enriching, just, you know, as a human being. It just completely changed my perspective of who we are and what we can become when we listen and when we engage and when we're inclusive. So in many ways, you know, it's made me definitely a better person.
Well, unfortunately, we're coming to an end of our program, but as I've said, we're going to do more of these. And I really wanted to get Charlotte on early because of the work that she's doing. And as you can see, because for me, I talk about Charlotte as a woman of brilliance, and I love so much the way she thinks, her demeanor, and her ability to work with many, many different types of people. And I think she's a great convener because of her wisdom. So thank you very much, Charlotte, and we will continue this discussion.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.